Hey, welcome back to True-Moto-Resto, and today we're going to get started into the teardown of the CBX750 engine. So, as I've said before, I'm not a professional mechanic. I'm not an accredited mechanic in any way. I am just a self-taught garage hobbyist, an idiot at play in the shop, so to speak. So that's that's about as far as my accreditation goes. It's the School of Hard Knocks, and just general, kind of try it out and see what works. And just kind of experience doing things myself over the years. So when it comes to this Honda 750 inline 4, never touched one in my life until now. I've done a couple of Honda V4s, taken one of those apart, but I've never done an inline 4. And so I do find the whole process of tearing down a 4-stroke engine a little intimidating. I got to be honest, I've done a couple of 2-strokes and they're so simple, but definitely the 4-stroke is a bit intimidating. So the way that I'm going to go at this is fairly cautious, just because of that paranoia. The last thing I want to have happen is to get this thing back together and then it doesn't function the way that it's supposed to. So here's my plan. I am going to put the valve cover back on so that I can basically turn this engine upside down in the not too distant future to work on it. I am going to assume that it's like a V4 in that, despite what the manual says, I do not have to take the head off, do not have to take the cylinders off, etc. That I should be able to just finish. I got to take this shifter cover off right here, and the shift linkage that's inside, I have to take that off for sure. And then there's should be 4 bolts in the top here somewhere. One there, one there, and then there should be another one somewhere. I just haven't located it yet. Maybe it's down in there somewhere. But anyway, there's supposed to be 4 according to the manual. I haven't been able to find 4, but that's what they're supposed to be. I'll go back and obviously I'll look again before I get into it. And then yeah, I can turn it over, and then there's just a litany of bolts underneath. There's probably, I think I read like 15 10 mil bolts and another, I don't know, another 10 or more bolts of another size. So there's a whole whack of them underneath. So that will require a good template to make sure that I don't get those all mixed up when it goes back together. The other thing that I'm going to do before I get too excited about splitting the cases, and before I get too excited about taking all this off, is I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to take the oil pump out so that I can see all of the transmission stuff in there. And then my idea then is I'll probably take the plugs out as well so that the engine turns over a little bit more easily. And then I'm going to put the shifter back on. And then what I want to do is I want to be able to observe and watch all of the gears engaging and disengaging. So going from neutral to first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. And I can see what's happening in there. That way, when I go to put this engine back together, because I have to take the transmission out, I'll have a little bit more comfort in knowing that when I put it back and I put the shifter back on before it goes back in the bike, I can actually see everything engaging properly and shifting the way that it's supposed to. I did that when I did the Honda V4, the 1000 in my VF 1000R, and it just gave me a little bit more comfort that I hadn't got a shift fork out of whack anywhere, or the linkage went back together wrong for the for the shifter and all of that kind of jazz. So somebody more experienced than me with this sort of stuff probably wouldn't have to do that, but I'm paranoid. So I figure better to take it slowly, one step at a time, and just be comfortable with that, and then we'll go from there. I did take out the driven gear for the oil pump. That was fairly straightforward. I just locked it out through a hole with a pin, and then took the 10mm bolt out. It does look like there's a very, very, very slight rub there, but I'm not going to lose sleep over that. To be honest, my objective here is to spend as little amount of money as possible on this engine. I'm already at my maximum budget with what I've spent on what I know I still have to spend on a couple of things. So I'm hoping that I don't find anything else in there that's going to cause me to have to either buy more stuff or, you know, cost me any more time with the engine apart once I get it, once I get in there. So the only thing that's getting replaced in there, as I hope, fingers crossed, is that Sprague clutch. Nothing else. So false economy, should I be changing other things while I'm in there? Possibly. But that's just the way it is. I could go so far overboard on this that I'd sink in more money than I'd ever get back, and that's just not going to happen here. So so that's the plan, and we'll see where we head next. What I'm now doing is I'm going to use this universal holder tool, and then see if I can crack that nut off in some way, shape, or form. Alright, so it appears this is the part that I require a puller for. Alright, so looks like I'm going to have to go and buy a 18 by 1.5mm tap thread to try to clean these threads out, and hopefully there's enough thread left in there for the extraction tool, which I have ordered from eBay in Germany. There's a new old stock item from Honda in there. Honda don't carry it anymore. Alright, so while I wait for the parts to pull that rotor, I'm going to pull the oil pump and just do a bit of work in other places. And in actual fact, what I'm not 100% sure of yet is whether or not I actually need to pull this rotor completely off, because what I'm sort of guessing from looking at the manual is that this assembly, once I've got the stuff off the inside, might pull out this way. So I may or may not need to remove that. So I'm going to go ahead and keep moving. And then if I do need to remove that, then the tools will be on the way. And if not, well, I'll probably save myself a pile of grief and aggravation. So it's got the 10mm socket here. So we're gonna okay, so I guess to remember when we put the pump back in, we have to put this end in kind of first this way. It's the only way to maneuver it past the shift drum. So the uppercase bolts are out there, made by a little template map of the top of the crankcase, so they all go back in the right place. So as you see, they're out. So one in there, one there, one there. It pointed to 4 fasteners on the top side of the crankcase that had to be undone, 4 bolts, and that one of them, it pointed here, which it did on the disassembly section, this vent port here. And so I could only find 3, which were over here. And so I decided to go to the reassembly section, which has it correctly pointing down inside this well here for the 4th bolt. So it is there. It's just down in there. So, all right, so here's the underside of the crankcase. There are 26 fasteners to undo, 26 bolts. And here is my template with a little hole for each of those bolts. So as I take them out one by one, they're going to go into there. And then the other thing that I did note is that when this goes back together, the larger bolts, of which there are, I can't remember how many there are, 11 I think, something like that, have to have an assembly lube applied to the threads and the flanges of the bolts to get the correct torque load clamping rate on that. So I've had to order some ARP thread assembly lube to do that properly. All right, so before I completely disassemble the lower half of the crankcase, what I'm going to do is, because I'm not super familiar with the transmission and the inline 4 together, so I don't want to get it all back together, or even get it back together and in the bike to find out that it's not shifting properly. I want to be able to put, when I reassemble it, once I put this lower crankcase on and the shift forks are in what I believe to be the right position, I can click it through all of the gears and know that everything's functioning properly. So what I want to do is I want to shift it through the gears now before I take it apart, so then I know how it's going to behave. All right, so I've shifted it through all the gears, and now before I take it apart, I know for sure that it's in neutral, because I can turn the output shaft while I hold the clutch shaft here, and the clutch shaft doesn't turn, and vice versa. So whereas if I go one into first gear, which is there, now these are locked together, so I know that I'm in. There's neutral, and there's second, and there's third, there's fourth, there's fifth, and there's sixth. Now back to neutral again. So now I know everything's the way that it should be. I know what to look for when I put this thing back together before I button it all up. So now that I've gotten comfortable with that, I can start loosening off these lower crankcase bolts, which I'll do gradually in stages, going back and forth, just so I don't have any issues with potentially warping the crankcase at all. Alright, so there is all of the bolts, and they're onto their place in the template, so that way I know which bolts go where when this thing goes back together. So the next stage is we'll give it a tap with a rubber mallet or a wooden mallet, hide hammer or something like that, and see if we can start to get the cases to separate. And then I'll be watching carefully to make sure I understand how those shift forks engage with the transmission before I completely pull it apart. All right, so there's the bottom half of the crankcase neatly removed. You can see I did not need to remove any of that shift linkage. So I still obviously I have to clean all of this. My plan is I am not removing the shift drum. I'm not removing the shift fork assembly at all. I am going to focus my efforts in here. So here we have our crankshaft. This is the cam timing chain, and this is the chain that drives the starter generator. So when you hit the starter against that sprocket, this is what is cranking the engine over. It's by this chain right here. In order to get to that starter clutch right there, I have to remove both of these gear sets. I have to remove this chain tensioner assembly. There's a plate down here, some sort of, I can't remember what it's called, oil cover plate, I think, something like that. 2 bolts have to come out, and then in the end of this shaft, holding it in here, is a bolt. So that bolt comes out, and then I believe I can then start to back this whole thing out of here. At least that's my hope, because I don't have the puller for this here yet. So, and at this point, I don't even know how easy that would be to pull that off of this thing apart, especially with the threads all bitched up in there. So anyway, my hope is that this comes off as an assembly out this way, and then I can just drop the pieces off the end of the shaft as I pull it out, and then I can put the new one in and then reassemble it in reverse order. Right, so there's the transmission gears have been lifted out. They came out, they just lift right out of there, so that's fairly straightforward. Alright, so with the 2 gear sets lifted out, it's a little bit easier to see in there. So there'll be a bolt here and one here to be able to remove the tensioner. And then those are the 2 bolts I have to remove to take that plate off. And then back under here is the bolt in the end there. So that'll be next. Alright, so there's the oil cover off. And next is I've got to figure out how to get that off. So I think basically the manual tells you to use the tool to hold that, and of course there's no way to get a socket on there. So unfortunately, against all my better judgment, I'm gonna have to use a box wrench on that, I guess, which I really don't like to do, but I'm not gonna have any choice because there's nothing else I can get on there. I ended up connecting a couple of wrenches here to get enough leverage to be able to crack this bolt out of here. Basically, I just backed this out far enough to get this starter clutch out. Now I can go ahead and compare it to the one I've got to go back in, and hopefully they're the same. Alright, so this is the new starter clutch. And what I've done just to comfort myself that they are going to be compatible, because they're not 100% identical. So the overall width this way, using my my micrometers, is the same. This clutch part is slightly wider, but there's actually a bigger space between the gear and the clutch on the other one. So overall, I think it should be okay. Same number of teeth, both have 38 teeth, and the width of the gear set is the same on the two. So really the only material difference that I can see is the spacing between the gear and the clutch. So the one thing I do want to double check on before I install it is to make sure that when the starter engages, it's not going to rub on the actual clutch housing itself here as it drives that sprocket. So we'll check that out and then go from there. All right, so the new starter clutch is in there, and I'm not sure if it's easy to see in there or not, but the starter motor is also installed. It was a little tricky to get the starter motor in, but it went in okay. Eventually, I guess. But what I might do is I just want to pull it off one more time, and because I was expecting that starter to go in a little easier. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one off and put the original one back on and see if the starter fits a little easier. So I'm just basically paranoid that I'm going to get this thing back together and it's going to be a problem to get it to work the way that I should. So I'd rather take the time now to pull it apart and just be 100% confident that everything I have in here is going to work the way that I need it to. Because I mean, it's not a big deal to pull this thing back out again. I have to do it anyway because I need to put in a new O-ring seal there. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to put a little bit of oil inside this. It's been in storage for a long time. And I don't know how dry it might be in there. So I'm going to oil this, put the original gear on, put a new O-ring on here, and then we'll try it again. Interestingly, the part numbers for this, it's off a 91 750 Nighthawk. So the Honda part numbers are the same, although they are, subtly different. So and I used the original shaft and the original sprocket and everything. This thing has been opened up before, this engine, so my guess is it was opened up to change this chain at some point. All right, so here's what I'm going to try next. I did remeasure the sprocket, and the outer diameter of this sprocket, this is the old sprocket, is 0.2 millimeters narrower than the new sprocket. Both the valleys and the peaks of this sprocket are 0.2 millimeters bigger on the new one. So I think that might be making the difference in how tight that starter is to get properly seated in there. So what I've done is I've taken the old sprocket, the old versus the new, and I've mounted it in the new Sprague clutch. So I'm hoping that will be it. The other thing I noticed is that the new Sprague has a roller bearing sleeve in it, and the old one did not. So that might have had something to do with why this one was not performing properly. All right, so this is the alternator shaft, and I've taken the old O-ring off here, and I've just put a new one on. So we'll give it a light coat of motor oil before we put that back in. All right, so we've got the shaft reinstalled. We have the new Sprague clutch with the original sprocket. And before I put the nut on there, I'm going to reinstall the starter motor just to make sure that it goes in as I expect. Alright, so the starter motor went in much easier. So I feel better that I took the time to double check that. And I've got appropriate clearance down here between the little kind of a protrusion on that starter motor gear. when you install it the right way around. So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be fouling on the clutch. All right, so everything is reinstalled, everything is tightened up, torqued, thread locker on the appropriate bolts in here for the socket bolts for the oil cover and the 3 bolts for the tensioner. Everything is reinstalled, and this is now spinning only one way as it's supposed to. And I did install some the original bolts in here just to make sure that before I tightened up the end bolt there, which pulls this case tight, that they were still going to be appropriately aligned, so I could get that generator cover back on later. So I think that'll do it for this video. Now all I'm going to do next is I'm going to clean up the mating surfaces of the case. There's all kinds of thread locker and crap that I'm probably going to have to chase. Certainly the outer threads for the outer bolts, the 6mm bolts, they are just chock full of thread locker and goodness knows what, so they have to be cleaned. And then after that, we'll put the transmission back in. So you'll see all that in the next video. But for this video, we're done. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and please subscribe, like, and share, and we'll see you on the next one.